Right, so Matt's going to run the numbers for our second album here, and then Josh is going to take us away in the segment. So
Okay,
Matt,
so this is the Raincoats. Last week I said Raincoats. It's actually the Raincoats, so just for clarity's purpose there. So this album comes in at number 395 in the 1970s on Best Ever Albums, number 39 in 1979, number 1,980 all time. It is the Raincoats' highest rated album on Best Ever Albums, and it also made Rolling Stone's list at number 398.
there we go.
All right. Well, this is the album that I finished shortly before recording the show tonight, so I have the hottest takes on this. I am a little mixed on this album, especially since listening to everything else. I appreciate and I can totally understand where this band is coming from. It's in that kind of punk rock. They're an English band. They're punk rock. They're kind of experimental also. We're going to make comparisons to the Slits, I'm sure, because they're around the same time, I think.
Well, they literally share band members too. So yeah,
there you go. But they are, I know we brought up the term noise rock before. That kind of came up for me. They are a pretty dissonant and jarring band at times. They have a violin, which is very screechy and works for me sometimes and doesn't work for me at other times. Sometimes within the same song even. They throw some horns in at times as well, which also has mixed results for me. I should also mention that they are all it's a women punk rock band, female fronted, female focused punk rock band, like the Slits and like X-Ray. Well, X-Ray Specs is both genders, but mixed gender. Anyway, I think ultimately my issue kind of is that it's a little too noisy and a little too screechy for me at times. It seemed a little avant-garde and experimental in the way that turns me off. Again, back to the violin, it did work for me sometimes. I thought that really separated the band from other things that we've listened to. Not too many people have thrown that in as a primary instrument. And so I appreciate that. I definitely understand what they're going for, I think. And I think they're also incorporating other things that are kind of in passing or not like the full focus. I think there's some kind of folk in here and maybe some other genres or things that they're paying homage to that I didn't catch up on. There is a cover of the Kinks song Lola, which we actually never talked about that album, even though we all universally regarded the Kinks well. I think that came later after their peak period. And so this would... And again, it also comes back to, I'm not sure I would listen to this album. There's not enough commercial appeal or catchiness in the way that I, found the Slits album to be, to presage our take on that. But so it was a little tough to enjoy completely, but I did like certain things about it. Also, I feel like the bass and the instruments and the vocals are kind of equally mixed on the album, so I feel like the bass was pretty prominent throughout. I noticed the bass lines more. That may be intentional, and I don't know, the vocals themselves, how they sound, may come up in our review, but I didn't really have an issue with that. It's more of like them in combination with everything else that kind of turned me off, if that makes sense. So yeah, mixed review. Maybe do another listen, but respect more than enjoy, I suppose, ultimately.
Well, yeah, this was the first week where we were allowed to do multiple listens, right? In the cold listen hot take. So I took advantage of that for a couple of these, and this was one of them. And I know I have actually never listened to this album, which is interesting because I know this album by reputation because I know Kurt Cobain and Kim Gordon of Sonic Youth, two groups I love the Raincoats. And actually, I'm pretty sure, if I remember, Kurt Cobain actually was responsible for them like reuniting in the night. There's like a crazy story that I looked up that I remembered there was a Kurt Cobain story. And when I watched that montage of Heck, and I don't want to spend all this time, but he actually in the Insecticide notes wrote a big thing about the Raincoats that I remember reading when I was much younger, and thinking to myself, I'll check that band out. And then I kind of never did for whatever reason. And yeah, and so a lot of people that I like were influenced by the Raincoats, or at least their music resonated with them. And I kind of see why. They are an amateurish outfit, which a lot of the groups coming out of punk were. A lot of, like, we're in the era where the creation of band to album is blisteringly quick, right? And the Raincoats are a good example. We're gonna do Slits later. They're at X-Ray Specs. The Clash turnaround time was incredibly quick. We're talking about Madness later. Their turnaround time was quick, as was pretty much everything in that British scene, right? One thing, you mentioned a lot of the things sonically, Josh. I want to mention the percussion here, because that stood out to me huge. I was trying to figure out what the description for what the sound was, and I finally gave up, and I said, I was having a hard time describing it. I finally found the word to describe. It's called polyrhythmic percussion, and that's where there's two different drum beats going on at different times that are doing totally different things, which I heard constantly
I heard that
throughout it. And the way the guitars are played almost is designed to give off an amateurish feel at times, I believe, intentionally. I'm going to guess that the level of virtuosity was also pretty amateurish from kind of my knowledge of the origin story as well. But it works in the sense that it creates a very rough sound that along with the drumming creates a level of chaos in the music.
It did feel that way. Yeah.
Yeah. And as a result, the first time I listened to it, Josh, I think I got a very similar take to you. That was discordant, and I had a hard time finding an entry point. I didn't dislike it, but it didn't resonate with me.
Yep.
The second time I listened to it, it still didn't emotionally resonate with me, but it started to go into some of the same places where, like, Can goes and stuff, where you start to pick out, or the Mothers of Invention, where they don't sound like that necessarily, but you start to pick out pieces of the sonic structure that appeal to you. Some of the free jazz was like that too, where the more I listened, right, the more I could pick out pieces of it that started to sonically hit me. I do think that this is one you got to listen to a lot of times, not because there's this deep level of complexity, but I think you have to almost brace yourself for the sonic structure the first couple times you listen to it before you can make a determination, at least before I can make a determination of how I truly feel about it. This type of music never is at the tippy top of my list of favorite types of music, but I also know well, and I know why this would resonate with anybody who especially was sort of like a disaffected teen of a certain type, that, especially with a female energy, that the spirit of the sound and the DIY nature of it does give it a certain vibrancy that jumps off the page. And that's one of the cool things about all of these late 70s bands in Great Britain. There's an energy in the scene that even translates 40 years later into my ears. So I mix just like you, Josh, but definitely I'm glad I listened, because it helped me connect some dots in terms of groups that I really appreciate later, and I could understand how dots were connected from them, and also in the context of the era. Putting all of these bands like X-Ray Specs and Wire and stuff. It's cool to have this true sonic palette.
Yeah, I didn't know any of this. I'd never heard of the Raincoats before, and I listen. I'm glad. I'm going to start doing more listens during our cold listens. We might have to change the name of of these episodes, because I think
just pluralize listens, cold listens.
Yeah, I get so much more out of listening to records more than once, and it's also just easier for my structurally in my life right now. But and this album absolutely required. I'm glad I listened to this multiple times, and I did like it. I think I'm mixed too, and I was just so surprised at how it's very minimalistic. Like what's the word? It's kind of like primitive almost, and like how stripped down the sound is. It's just and yeah, it's like there's no virtuoso playing. It's very non-produced. It's just very basic, right? But there's a lot going on with the drumming, the time signatures, the vocal parts. Like they're singing on top of each other, and they're certainly not doing like a lush harmony like a Crosby, Stills, and Nash. There are some harmonies, but they almost seem like they don't fit. So you got that arty indie rock feel to it. This is definitely like a precursor to indie rock and 90s alt rock, really, for a lot of the like those bands like Nirvana and Sonic Youth you're talking about. I'm hearing a little bit. I could see. I'm sure Slater Kinney was into these guys as well.
You are correct, Matt. They are. Yep.
Yeah. So
Riot Girl in general was influenced by this.
Exactly.
FYI.
Yeah. And I think that there's moments in here that I really liked, and other moments that were a little bit harder. Like The Void was a particularly difficult listen. That one might be. It's like kind of what they're going for, and that's one of the songs that where that vibe comes in that Josh was talking about. And it's like they get somebody playing the violin who I don't know how trained they are in playing the violin, to be quite honest. You know, it's like they're still trying to figure that out. But You're a Million has a great driving guitar part. That's a more of a fuller sound that kind of stands out in this record. I like the last track, No Looking. There's just a cool little. I like the way that ends, and I love, like Josh said, I think the version of Lola is really good. It's kind of an interesting,
it is
take on that. So I always like, a cover of a really good song that's done in their way, And so that's got to be the most appealing or a mass appealing song on this, or the easiest song to listen to. But
did you find it interesting to listen to Lola from the perspective of a female singing it? I did. Lyrically.
I mean, did they change the lyrics? I was trying to think about that as
No.
I was listening.
No, they didn't change the lyrics.
And the Kinks sing the song pretty straightforwardly, right?
Yeah.
But there's something about the way she sings it that you really hear the lyrics, so if you were wondering what the song was about when the Kinks sang it, there was no doubt about it when they sang it.
No, it does stand out more, and part of that's because of the lower production, right? That's kind of it's not hard to decipher what they're saying because they are singing fairly clearly on that. So yeah, I like that, and so really glad that I got to be exposed to this, because really just had no clue before. I'm sure the Pixies like this too. These bands that go on to really kind of take over the alt rock, format, really like more than a decade later plus, and so, but to have no idea who they are and now be exposed to them. And then, there's another, like you guys said, the Slits will cover them as well, but they're very kind of in those same lanes. So, I'm going to go with a thumbs up on this. It's not something that I'm going to put on a lot, or it's not something that you can just listen to whenever. This might be a little bit more of a mood record, or just like something to, if I feel like I want to be a little challenged or do something a little different, I think I could go back to this. And I think that there's certainly enough going on here that you can, I was hearing different things the more I listened to it. And even though that's kind of interesting for an album that's fairly minimal in what's going on, but they're doing some interesting, groundbreaking stuff here. And so I'm going to give this a thumbs up.
I guarantee you Johnny Greenwood is also like this album.
Yeah, it's just like so many artists that I know and love, and it's like I'm going to like them more than this, but this is is the stuff that laid that foundation.
Are there, John, when you looked up that term, are there any other bands that we've listened to that do that? Because I feel like there is something I've heard that does that.
Polyrhythmic. Well, it's sometimes you hear it in the I immediately recognized it from like free jazz, like Eric Dolphy had some of that in it. Jazz is where it immediately struck out to me. I want to say there was a Santana song that had polyrhythmic drumming in it as well. Like a lot of world music has it in it. Fela Kuti definitely had it in songs too. Yeah. But in terms of like mainstream rock, no, and that's why it stood out, because of that, the violin, was it like a marimba or something sound I heard in there?
There's a lot of instruments in here buried, kind of.
There were, yeah. I also want to mention, and I recognized this before I had seen it, Hole, who I'm sure was influenced by the Slits at the very least, both in band name and sonic. They covered The Void and a song I remember from, I want to say it might have been on Live Through This. I remember listening to it though back in the day. So it's a pretty good cover too, as you might imagine. Yeah. So yeah, interesting album. This is one of those that doing this journey is good, because I don't know if I ever would have gotten to this album, and I'm glad I did, because I've wanted to listen to it for a very long time and I never have, and now I have. So multiple times.